Uh, Today I would like to show a uh, reaction engine, I guess, that I've made. Um, this follows along with Newton's law of equal and opposite reaction. Um, it's essentially a giant catapult, but there's a little bit more to it than than just throwing stuff, I guess. Uh, okay, I guess I should start with um, a bit of a thorn in my side is the thrust to weight ratio of the thruster. Um, it has if you were able to if you were able to get the vector of a thruster to be perfectly straight and somehow managed to power it without anything attached to it, it would accelerate to a speed of roughly 6,200 or so blocks per second. Um, might be about 6,400. I can't quite remember, but about that speed. Now, that's assuming somewhere between 90% and 100% of the mass is dedicated to thrusters all pushing the said vehicle. With something like aircraft, a significant majority is also going to the structure or thrusters dedicated to moving it in other directions like roll or the lift, of course, and other things. So the net terminal velocity or your acceleration caps out quite early. Um, and for a long time, I've been wondering if there were more force asymmetries similar to that of the numerous rotational force asymmetries that can be produced with these spring blocks. Um, but these forces for linear directions instead of rotational. And um, the main the main goal, I guess, has been to find said force or characteristic and then attempt to magnify it into something more effective than the thruster blocks. You may have noticed that aircraft like this and my battleship, gunship, all use these thrusters. These are the thrusters from before that big update. Um, and the reason why I use these is because these have a better thrust to weight ratio. If I use the newer ones, first off, I don't think the way they sound, I don't think is very fitting of a thruster, and just they, in theory, would perform well. Not in theory, in fact, they perform worse because they are heavier. I've measured their mass and their thrust. Their thrust is the same, but they're heavier. Even the newer, the best ones. Um, and just in the search of trying to find these linear forces that I can magnify, I came to somewhat of a resolve, and that is this machine. Um, well, it it uses equal and opposite reaction to propel itself along, and with a single heavy mass, it does propel itself quite well. Now, I haven't completely worked out the kinks with the machine, so I'm definitely not going to get any clean take trying to run this. Um, but I'll show it anyway. Uh, these are sand blocks. They have the highest weight for their low durability. And I've clipped a lot of these together into very, very dense compactions. Their mass is decreasing by half every one of these. This one should have a mass of 1,012, no, 1,024. Yeah, a mass of 1,024. the next one would be 512, then 128, then 64, and so on. Um, and the reason for the descending pattern of this is because in order to get a fairly constant acceleration, um, you have to keep a fairly constant ratio between the mass you are pushing on and the mass you are acting against. Um, and that's why when you if you're going to launch a heavy mass, or if you're propelling a heavy mass, you want to launch a heavy mass. Once you've done that, you're a bit lighter, so you might want to launch a mass that's the same weight as that. Um, Now, preferably, this would be a completely self-contained reaction, where the exterior characteristics could be described as the change in mass is equal to the change in velocity, where as the mass goes down, the velocity goes up. These would primarily just be represented by variables, um, and the ratio is not so clean cut because the mass in theory would be going down at a different rate than the velocity. Very close, but not perfect. Um, I have it running on a clock, and you can see it works. Um, Not very well, obviously. And I mean, this is my first attempt at the machine. I certainly haven't worked out the kinks, but this is just, I mean, it's a proof of concept. Um, in the best possible circumstances, you would have some sort of mechanism moving back and forth. Here, I'll build it. In ideally, in an ideal situation, you would have some sort of device moving very fast, like this, um, where only the distance would be much greater distance of travel, where the speed of its motion is synced up with the time step of the game, such that in one frame it is at its resting position, the next it is at its highest velocity, where the next frame it would then have been separated, and then it has the same sequence in the return phase without the mass. Um, and this mass would be created spontaneously when it reattaches. Now, if you have, and then as the mass gets disconnected and the force is transferred back, it would be destroyed by something like a potato gun. Such a device would be a completely self-contained mechanism that could produce a linear force. Um, and it being synced up with the time step of the game, you could get a very, very, very high amount of force, and probably even a top speed greater than that of the thruster. Um, this Obviously, there isn't any way to spontaneously create matter with a device apart from the player's ability to create matter and destroy matter. Um, so something like a cartridge of um, decreasing mass would have to be expended. Um, I'll be working on this a little bit. Um, I'll try to make it better. I'll try to improve its cycle time. If I compact this design um, and increase the amount of bearings being used to produce the force, I can increase the amount of energy that is going into the reaction between the two masses, the masses being the quote-unquote propellant and then the vehicle. Um, so that's been my little experiment. And I guess I'll keep you up to date on that.